All right, today we're tackling a huge question that is fundamentally changing how we use the internet. How do you balance free speech with protecting kids online? And look, this isn't just some academic debate. It's a real legal fight that's going to affect every single one of us. So let's get right into it. So picture this. What if, before you could go to certain websites, you had to pull out your driver's license or hand over some other personal data just to prove you're an adult? I mean, is that a reasonable safety step? Or is that a massive roadblock to speech that's perfectly legal and protected by the Constitution? Well, believe it or not, that's the very question the Supreme Court just wrestled with. The case is Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton, and it all centers on this really controversial law out of Texas called HB 1181, which is basically trying to put up a digital age gate around a big chunk of the internet. So what does this law actually do? Well, it says that any commercial website where at least a third of the content could be seen as harmful to minors has to verify that every single visitor is 18 or older. And we're not talking about just clicking a checkbox here. We're talking about uploading a government ID or using other private data. The penalties for not doing it, they're huge, up to 10 grand a day. So yeah, this set up a massive legal showdown with major implications for all of us. Okay, so this gets us right to the core of the legal fight. See, when a law touches on free speech, courts can't just say, yep, we like it, or nope, we don't. They have to use a specific framework, a kind of test, to see if the law is constitutional. And really, this whole case came down to one thing. Which test was the Supreme Court going to use? And that's where this idea of constitutional scrutiny comes in. The best way to think about it is like the First Amendment has a bunch of security guards. Some are pretty relaxed, they'll let most laws pass by without a problem. But others, they're like Fort Knox guards. They check every little detail and almost nothing gets past them. So which security guard a law has to face is literally a life or death question for that law. And there are basically three levels of these guards. The easiest one to get by is rational basis. Then you've got the one in the middle, intermediate scrutiny, which is for laws that kind of accidentally affect speech. But at the very top, you have strict scrutiny. This is the toughest one, the highest hurdle, and it's saved for laws that go right after speech because of its content. So the whole fight was about this. Does the Texas law face the really tough, strict test, or the more manageable intermediate one? The answer to that question changes everything. So let's start with the winning side. 6 of the justices, in an opinion penned by Justice Clarence Thomas, came down on the side of Texas. And this quote from Justice Thomas really gets to the very heart of their argument. His logic is pretty straightforward. If a state has the power to keep certain content away from kids, then it has to have the tools to actually do that. And for the majority, age verification is one of the most essential tools in that toolbox. So here's how their logic breaks down into 3 simple steps. First, they start from the idea that yes, states absolutely have the power to keep certain material away from minors. Step 2, they say asking for proof of age is a totally normal way to do that. We do it for alcohol, we do it for tobacco, why not this? And that leads them to their big conclusion: any hassle this causes for adults isn't the point of the law. It's just an incidental side effect of trying to protect kids. And because they saw the burden on adults as just an accident, a side effect, they decided the law shouldn't have to face that super tough security guard. Nope, they said intermediate scrutiny is the right test to use here. But this was not a unanimous decision, not by a long shot. 3 justices, with Justice Elena Kagan writing for them, saw the Texas law in a completely different light. Let's dig into what they had to say. This slide really just perfectly captures the divide. While the majority is saying, hey, this is just an incidental burden, the dissent is saying, no, 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 this is a direct content-based regulation. From their point of view, making an adult show an ID to see constitutionally protected speech isn't a side effect. It's a direct hit on their rights, and it's triggered by the very content of the speech. And Justice Kagan's dissent was powerful. I mean, she says the majority's logic just craters. She even says, look, maybe this Texas law could pass the toughest test, strict scrutiny. But her point is, you have to apply the test. The government has to prove that this law is the absolute least restrictive way to get the job done. And the dissent didn't just pull this out of nowhere. They pointed to decades of Supreme Court cases. You know, from the old dial-a-porn cases back in the 80s to the first big internet cases in the 90s and 2000s. Kagan says the court has always used strict scrutiny for stuff like this. They see the majority's decision as a huge break from the past, especially from a 2004 case, Ashcroft, that they call a near twin of this Texas law. So for the dissenters, the answer was just obvious.
Based on all that history and the principles of the First Amendment, the only correct test for a law that puts up a barrier to adult speech based on its content is the highest one there is: strict scrutiny.
So you have these two completely different ways of looking at the First Amendment. In the end, which side won? And more importantly, what does this all mean for how the internet is going to look and feel for us?
At the end of the day, the vote was 6-3. A clear majority of the court agreed with Justice Thomas.
And so the verdict was simple and direct. The Supreme Court upheld the lower court's ruling. The Texas age verification law is allowed to stand.
So why does this matter to you and me? Well, first, it sets a brand new legal standard. It lowers the bar for these kinds of age gate laws. That makes it a whole lot easier for other states to pass similar laws, and tons of them are already trying to. It also marks a really big shift from how the court used to handle internet speech cases. But for us, the users, the bottom line is this: you can expect to see a lot more websites asking you to prove your age, even for content that is 100% legal for adults to see.
This decision really redraws the map in the long-running tug-of-war between online freedom and online safety. It hands states a lot more power to wall off content to protect kids, but it comes at the cost of new burdens for adults. And it leaves us with this massive, looming question for the future: where does that balance between freedom and safety go from here?